Serious, what are some cryptid / ghost / unexplained stories you'd be willing to share? One afternoon I was at work. I walked past a room with a window in the door and automatically glanced in the window. There was a woman standing in the room, except there were only 3 people in the building, and the other 2 were in the office behind me. I took a couple steps, realized what I had just seen, and backed up quickly, but by the time I got back to the window, the room was empty. There was only one door, and when I opened it, the room was empty. At the same building, a coworker was telling me that she was in the office right around the corner from that same room. She couldn't see the door, but she could see the shadow of the door on the floor as it slowly opened and closed. She was the only one in the building at the time, and she refused to check. I arrived about an hour later, and she asked me to check the door, and it was still locked. I worked there about 3 years, and every single one of us had stories. We heard voices in empty rooms. Once we were sitting in the office, and we heard somebody breathing in an empty corner. It was common to be in one of the rooms and think somebody had just walked into the room, only to look up and find that the room was empty, except for you. I had one manager who scoffed at all of our stories. She did not believe us when we told her there was something fairly benign but creepy in the building. We were sitting in the office. She scoffed and loudly said, "If there's anything in here, prove it." We all held our breath, kind of nervous, a bit scared but also curious. And just about the time my manager was getting that look on her face that said, "Ha, told you so," something was thrown out in the hallway. It took several minutes to work up the courage before going to check and finding that a book that normally sat on a bookshelf near the front door had somehow gone from that bookshelf around the corner and halfway down the hallway. The manager never talked about it and quit shortly after that. I've since quit also, but last I heard, they were still hearing voices and seeing shadows in the building. I shared this on Reddit a couple of times. I'll make it short this time. 6 or so years ago, weird shit started happening in my mother's apartment. I lived there alone. She lived there with her boyfriend, but kept the apartment anyway. The door to my bedroom would open or close on its own. At some point in the night, it would close or open at random intervals, with the door handle moving and all that. And not like slowly, sometimes it would full-on slam shut or open. I tried everything, closing all the windows to see if maybe it was the wind, nope. Seeing if there was anyone else in the room, never found anybody. Plus the room on the other side was empty, except for a wardrobe. Hell, it even happened more than a few times in front of a friend. The friend in question also told me my lamp started to switch on and off when I was sleeping. Not like in the movies, where the lamp malfunctions. She said it was like it was turning on, then off, then on, etc. Toward the end of this, the sofa that was right beside the door moved by itself while I was on it in the middle of the night while I was on Skype on camera. The door kept opening and closing a few times a night for a few days, then it stopped. Also, I kept having sleep paralysis and visual and auditory hallucinations at the time, LOL. I honestly could have thought I was simply going crazy, but I had eyewitnesses. Never understood what happened this week. Never happened again. I grew up in an old house, and my family definitely experienced events that were hard to explain. Besides all the usual noises and occasionally hearing your name being spoken, here's the top 2 weirdest things. Number 1. My brother and I were teens, eating dinner in the kitchen. There was a glass of water on the counter. We heard a noise where the glass was and both looked toward it, and we swore we saw it move an inch. As we were still looking and discussing it, the glass flew several feet across the counter and smashed onto the floor. Number 2. Once when I was in college and I was home for holidays, I was in the kitchen getting food prepared. I was home alone at that point, and my brother was due home at any moment. I heard the front door open and close. I called out hello to my brother and heard nothing back. Then I saw a shadow pass by the kitchen into the hallway, and I assumed my brother was being rude, so I followed and kept calling hello. I saw the shadow again, turning another corner towards my brother's bedroom. I saw my brother's door closing. At this point, I was calling out about what a jerk he was, because we hadn't seen each other in months. I pushed the bedroom door open and uttered some insults, haha, and the room, as well as the whole house, was empty. That was super chilling. I really had seen someone moving through the house. Flash forward 15 years later, and when my husband and I bought an oldish house built in 1870, I was up in the 3rd floor arranging boxes, and I heard a very clear and very polite woman's voice say, "Well, hello there." Never saw or heard anything in this house since. I got home from school one day and decided to play a game on my computer. During intermission in the game, I would talk in a group chat with a couple of my friends. We were telling jokes and making each other laugh until I needed to use the restroom. I told them I would be right back and left my phone on the desk and didn't turn it off. When I returned, I noticed that some of the letters were being pressed even though no one was in the room with me. It wasn't a word that was typed, but random letters with an @ symbol spacing them out. To me, it didn't mean anything, so I asked my friends if they thought it meant something, but they were startled by it and didn't know what it meant either. I thought it was strange, but decided to ignore it. Later that night, when I decided to go to bed, I turned off my lamp and got under the sheets. My cat, Portia, was by me sound asleep. A few moments later, I heard what sounded like footsteps slowly creeping through the hallway to my bedroom. Suddenly they stopped right outside my doorway. I glanced up and expected to see my brother, but no one was in sight. From her dead sleep, Portia bolted up, stood at the end of my bed and stared into the hallway. I was confused since she had never done that before. I tried to get her back to her normal spot on my bed, but she wouldn't budge. I even put my hand in front of her face, but she kept trying to peer over it. She eventually sat back down and went to bed. Since then, I haven't had any other experiences like that, and I still wonder if there was something trying to contact me that night. There was a really weird occurrence at my dad's house a few years ago. He woke to the sound of dogs barking and realized the neighborhood dogs were barking at something that was moving parallel to the road. When his own started to bark, he went outside to see what was up. Across the street is pretty much all forest, except for a church directly across the street that at the time was just a gravel lot. My dad was too far away to see anything, but in the dead of night, he could definitely hear the sound of someone running at full tilt across the gravel. A few things freaked him out from this. 1, whatever it was definitely ran on 2 feet. Try having a dog run on gravel versus a human and you can tell the difference, and it was big. Both myself and he have witnessed large animals like bears and moose running through the underbrush, and according to him, it sounded like it was of a similar size to those creatures. 2, it was easily running somewhere around 40 to 50 miles per hour in the clearing of the lot, then slowed down again as it went back into the woods. He was able to compare the speed because the road itself is 45 miles per hour limit, so it was going just as fast as a passing car. 3, the final thing, its huffing and gasping was so loud he could hear it from his front door and was obviously not human. We looked online later to compare its sounds to other animals, and it really didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard before. The freakiest part was the almost synchronous reaction the dogs had. He's never heard dogs react like that before. Both him, my stepmom, my stepbrother, and several of our neighbors all can account for hearing the strange barking from the dogs, but it was only my dad who heard what they were after. Nothing happened like that since, and I've never personally witnessed anything like it. We do live right on the border of the Cascade Mountain Range and are surrounded by park and federal land if you want to get an idea of where this took place. My grandpa lived in an extremely rural, undeveloped area in the 40s to 50s when this occurred. Every time he would walk to school in the early morning, it would be pitch black, especially in the winter. There was this huge, old, unoccupied house that he'd walk by each morning, and each morning he'd see the entire house light up, as if there were automatic lights or someone inside flipping all the light switches. The thing was, it was an ancient house in which no one lived, but more important in my opinion, electric lights in every room weren't a widespread thing where he lived, even in houses with living occupants. Another one, my dad, his 2 brothers, and his parents, his father was the grandpa who walked by the haunted house, had their share of poverty at certain points in my dad's childhood, to the point where my grandpa ate shortening and cucumber sandwiches to save money, to the point where the family went fishing in the nearby lake so they could have dinner, which takes us into our next story. They were fishing for a good while with no bites. Suddenly this random man appeared with a tiny fishing box set up right next to them and started to fish. My grandpa would always emphasize how small the fishing box was because he'd say the man took out a bucket, bait, tackle, etc. from it like he was Mary Poppins. He very quickly pulled in a lot of fish. Then, according to my grandpa, he pulled out a big knife and a board, cut and cleaned the fish, pulled out a big box, put the cleaned fish inside, gave the box to my grandpa, and just left. They never saw him again. My grandparents and my dad think it was Jesus. I don't know what my uncles think. I've never talked to them about it. Not sure of the veracity of these stories. But at least with the second one, there were 3 people who very earnestly told me the same story. One night, I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key into our front door and opening it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. Now, this didn't alarm us since we knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he had returned. "Dad, you're back already?" I casually asked. There was no response. "Dad?" I asked again, thinking he had not heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point, I get the feeling that something isn't quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. I'll note that up to this point, she had spent the evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliches, and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment, wondering what we should do, before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen in fear by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder but shakier voice. "Dad, is that you? Please respond, repeated in my head, but the silence continued. Now at this point, I'm freaking out, and I literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly gets up and starts rapidly walking towards the other end of the room, which leads to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and began opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. I know, I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown creepy noise without anything to protect myself with. When the door was finally open wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut. We never heard the door close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we were almost certain that there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mom, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of our house, if it was her or whether she had noticed anything. She told me that she thought my dad had come home as well, and she also heard someone opening the front door. Around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at the time, as we were still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he had not come home earlier. To this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. At my old middle school, I would have volleyball practice twice a week in the evenings. My sisters, 2 years older and 5 years older, did the same thing at my age. I remember going to return the volleyballs upstairs from my coach one night into her classroom, which was 2 stories above the gym. I made it up the stairs and saw the door for the class across the hallway start to slowly open, and a really bright light and smoke or something slowly drifting out, almost dancing. I booked it downstairs and waited a little bit until my coach could walk up with me. The door was shut, like nothing happened. About 8 or so years later, I was talking with my sister, 2 years older than me, about what I saw, and I was half expecting her to think I was being crazy. I go into detail, telling her what it looked like, which classroom and door and everything. She wasn't responding to me, so I looked over at her for the first time in a couple of minutes, and she was crying. She told me she saw the exact same thing too, and couldn't go back upstairs alone ever again. She was relieved to finally find out that she wasn't making it up in her head or being crazy. We thought of all the possibilities of what it could be, custodians cleaning with the lights on and maybe smoking, but nope. It was too bright for any normal lights in there and way too dark outside for it to be shining through any window. Plus, the custodians would always clean after school and before our practices. School was done by 2:30 and practice was always 6:30 to 8:30. We've heard many other stories from other kids at the school who had after-school activities and would see/hear weird shit. still creeps us both out to this day. I made a throwaway to post this because people know my main, and it's kind of embarrassing, and I've only told my partner because I'm definitely the type who rolls my eyes at ghost stories and holds firm on the stance that I don't believe in ghosts. And yet, I have 2 brothers, and we all lived in a small house when I was about 8 to 11 years old. All of us kids hated the downstairs. It was always chilly, which is normal for a basement, but it felt like a creepy chilly. Sounds lame, I know, but my little brother, probably 6 when we first had that house, had a room downstairs and hated it. Would go so far as to not sleep in his room because he was so frightened. He wouldn't even enter the basement bathroom. He always had awful nightmares in that house, and so did I. All of us kids still refer to it as the haunted house. It sounds stupid to type, but it just truly had a bad feeling to it. Anyways, the incident. I was about 11 and downstairs alone. There was like a 45-minute gap between getting off school and when my mom got home, and my brothers weren't there. Must have been with my dad, can't quite remember. So I was on the computer, which was in the basement, and to my left is the staircase heading up, and my cat was sitting on the landing between the first set of stairs and the second. It's also only about 4 p.m., so it was light out, and I had no music playing, so there was nothing to confuse me. The next part will probably sound minor and not freaky, but I get chills thinking of it. Suddenly I hear, hi, 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 starting as a whisper and getting progressively louder and circling the room as though someone was running around. I might have chalked it up to me hearing something, I guess, except the hi got to the staircase directly to my left. My cat arched her back and hissed loudly. I fucking bolted upstairs, my cat following me, and never went down solo again until we moved into our next house. This was from the time I was 13. I remember it clearly because it happened the day I found my cat. That day I returned home kind of early from school because I used to return walking, but that day I took the bus. So nobody was home at that hour except for me. I was eating something before taking a nap, and the phone started ringing. I answered the call, but there wasn't any sound on the other side. I hung up and was about to go when it started ringing again. I answered and nothing, so I hung up again. That happened many times in a period of 20 to 25 minutes. The phone started ringing for the 10th time, I think, and I was angry at this point because I thought someone was making a prank, but no. This time, when I answered, there was someone, and that someone was crying, and in the background there was a very creepy and, believe me, inhuman laugh. It sounded metallic. Just after I asked, "How can I help you?" I heard that the person who was crying started to shout something that wasn't in my language, then it stopped. Then I heard the laugh sounded closer, and at that point I was super scared and just hung up the phone in shock. It was a minute later I realized that maybe I had witnessed a crime or something similar. So I started checking the call record to tell the police what number was the one calling. It was empty. No calls that day. I was astonished. Then I called the police and informed about it. They called me hours later, very angry, telling me that they contacted the phone company and there wasn't any call to my phone at that hour I pointed this thing to have happened. Until today, I don't know what the hell happened, like I'm trying to seek an explanation to this.